Mountaineering Outdoor Expo today. My first expo memories go back to when I was about probably 10 years old. So it's been kind of a lifelong fun event every spring and fall. But today we're here to talk about another one of my passions, slacklining, and a passion shared by many in Minnesota, like Adon mentioned. What we're thinking for today with regards to questions is fire them off. This is let's talk about your questions in real time. So you can enter them into the chat box and Adon will go ahead and read them off in real time and I'll answer them. So agenda for the day, or I guess kind of already addressed this, but who am I? The most important to that answer to that question is a philosophical one. Please don't exit out of the chat right away. That's meant to be a joke. They say you're supposed to start your presentation with a joke. But I'm Mark McKee. I live in Minneapolis, have for quite some time. I've been slacklining for over 10 years. I love it. And I, along with a couple other people, around kind of the 2012, 2013 time frame, started Min Slack, which is a Facebook group that's used for slackliners in the Midwest to connect and collaborate on projects, as well as Slackline Minnesota, which is a new nonprofit, well, new as of like 2019, to support the slackline community here in Minnesota. And we'll talk a little bit more about what both of those entities, I guess you could call them, organizations do. And most importantly, how to, well, what they do and how to get involved. So the agenda for today, I understand that a lot of people tuning into this presentation won't necessarily have a full understanding of what slacklining is. And in terms of the entire spectrum of slacklining, with the hour that we have, we're not going to accomplish a full understanding of all the components, but what we're looking for here is a broad strokes understanding of the sport, as well as different aspects of the sport that you might gravitate towards. Just like anything, you know, if you're into paddling, you might love whitewater kayaking, but not sea kayaking. Everybody loves canoeing, so that's kind of one of those exceptions, but we'll give you an understanding of slacklining, how do the various components as well as the equipment work. We reference different types of slacklining. We'll touch on some of those. Slacklining is one of those things you can go as deep as you want to in terms of your understanding and pursuit of it. Safety is a huge thing in slacklining, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the slackline scene in Minnesota, how to get involved with it, the various resources that are available. And then the fun part of any expo presentation is some of our adventures, our group of, you know, anywhere between 15 to 50 people right here in the local scene that are doing stuff all the time. We'll show you some of the pictures of the lines we have here locally around the state, the trips that we've been on around the country. And then I want to start slacklining, but how? We'll give you some good tips for how to get going. So what is slacklining? I would like to share this short video with you. There's a brief kind of little commercial for an organization called the International Slackline Association, right in the center of the video, but these guys explain it a little bit better than I can. So let's just watch this real quick.
Hi friends, this is a slackline. It's made of nylon or polyester, not steel.
Hey Mark, turn it up a little bit on the video.
The amazing things that the human brain and body are capable of. Slacklining is a balance-based activity that improves your focus and concentration, fixes your posture, and strengthens your muscles and joint stability. And just like any other balance-based activity, it is infinite. There's always room to grow and improve. There's always a new trick to learn or a new challenge to overcome. And the fun part is simple. Don't fall. Try to keep your body on the line as best as you can. The International Slackline Association is pleased to present a series of slacklining educational videos to help anyone learn wherever they may be. Stay tuned for more videos and tutorials taking you through the infinite steps of the amazing journey of slacklining. The wizards you see walking on a thin line above the ground in parks and defying gravity are regular people just like you, and they want you to come out and play. We all started on low and short lines and took our first shaky steps while someone held our hands and encouraged us. And we made new friends and built communities based on teaching, learning, sharing, and conservation. Check out the links in the description below for more information on how you can find your local slackline group. And welcome to the beautiful future of ninja training. Hi friends, This is a slackline.
Unless we want to watch it again. The woman narrating that video is Miriana Paloma. She's part of our larger slackline community. She lives up in Ontario and just an awesome person. So how does slacklining work? Before we get into the adventures, the methods for slacklining, let's just talk about the assembly, the equipment. You know, you're fixing a piece of webbing between two anchor points and interacting with it. So slacklining refers to the act of walking or balancing along a suspended piece of webbing, flat rope. It's basically just a woven synthetic material that takes on a flat shape, most typically 1 inch wide, and it's most commonly nylon or polyester, that's suspended between two anchors and tension to some degree. It differs from tightrope walking, although at first glance you see many similarities between the two activities, in that tightropes are rigged with steel cable, and a slackline is set with a synthetic fabric, nylon or polyester. And slacklines are tensioned to varying degrees, but not anywhere near what you'd see, what you would tension a tightrope to, or just the tension of the tightrope rig, just based on the weight of that steel cable. So let's see here. The multiple components in your slackline assembly are laid out here. The first thing you think about when you're rigging a slackline is what anchors are you going to use? An anchor is just a strong point, or two strong points rather, between which you are able to walk on a slackline. So a slackline like this only needs to be a little over a foot off the ground. Your anchors are going to be trees here. And whenever we attach a slackline to anything, we use what's called anchor materials. Just like in climbing, you need to protect your anchor material from any possibility of abrasion. And if you're rigging to a tree, you also need to protect the tree from any wear that would be caused by repeated use. So here we have our anchors, and then this arrow points to our anchor padding. And literally any slackline you ever rig needs some padding, like I mentioned, to protect your anchor material, which in this case is a polyester webbing sling that comes with this slackline kit from Slackline Industries. And then the webbing that Heather is walking on in this picture is 2 inch wide polyester. And there's all different types of webbing that we'll talk about a little bit further in this presentation, but that's also just a fun thing to explore as you explore the sport of slacklining. So we have our webbing there. The last component in the slackline system is our tensioning system. There's a multitude of options related to how to add a little bit of tension to your slackline. One of the most common that you'll see if you go rollerblading around Lake Calhoun, you'll see a lot of slacklines that are rigged with a ratchet tensioning system. And so that's what they're utilizing here. This is by no means your only option, but it's definitely one of the most common, particularly because it accommodates this 2-inch wide webbing, which is preferred by a lot of beginners. Many high-level expert professional slackliners that you'll talk to today started on one of these kits. Let's see here. So the first question in rigging a slackline is your anchor. If you're going out to the park, that can be pretty straightforward. The most simple to interact with and strongest options, actually all these options are adequately strong, is going to be a tree or a natural anchor. And when we say a tree or natural anchor, say you're rigging a high line, for example, and we'll talk more about the intricacies of that process. If there is just a giant boulder that you can take a 20-foot span set or connect multiple span sets, and a span set is an industrial sling that we commonly use in rigging, and wrap it around that big boulder such that it's secure and the boulder isn't going to move, that would also fall into the category of a natural anchor. Much less common in Minnesota, more common out west, or any other areas where the climbing ethic that has been established allows for the use of bolts, would be bolt anchors. And these are just preferably glue-in bolts into strong rock that you rig your slackline to. And then another really interesting option would be a ground anchor for slackline rigging. So say you say, I really want to enjoy a slackline with my kids in the yard, but the trees just don't really seem strong enough, or we don't have any trees. There are a multitude of ground anchor options available for you. This one pictured here is called a dead man anchor, where basically you just bury a 4x4 a few feet in the ground, run a sling up from it. This here is a polyester sling, but you could also just use a chain in the direction that your slackline is going to be tensioned. And then you can construct a simple A-frame out of 2x4s, just however high you want, to serve as your elevating component to rig your slackline. And this can work on one side, say you have one tree in your yard that you can rig to, or you can set 2 ground anchors and you have a slackline. So ground anchors, or anchor establishment, is an important craft in the sport of slacklining. These 3 photos are some of the most common types. There are many more to learn about, which is just a really exciting prospect. There's a lot of creative ways to establish your slackline anchors. You can establish anchors in a multitude of environments, and you utilize a lot of different material. The first priority, though, is that the anchor is far stronger than any amount of tension you would ever put on it. So the rule of thumb is an anchor needs to be at least 5 times the maximum load you would ever put on it, and that would kind of dictate your 5-to-1 safety ratio versus the maximum amount of tension you would ever put on that anchor versus its structural capability. The next part of a slackline assembly, so you have your 2 anchors on either side of your webbing of your slackline. What is in between and what you interact with is the slackline itself. And so this is just a broad introduction to the various types of materials that are available. And these materials will suit different purposes in different scenarios, depending on what type of slacklining you're looking to do. So a lot of people start out with a 50mm or 2-inch beginner slackline. And this type of webbing, if it is preferred by trick liners as well. And I'm sure a lot of folks have seen videos of folks bouncing very high in the air, doing flips. The webbing for 2-inch beginner slacklines, as well as those trick lines, looks the same. And here's what it looks like. So it has a wider surface area for comfort. It accommodates that ratchet tensioning system, which is the cheapest and most, well, not the cheapest, but it's one of the cheapest and a very effective way to tension your beginner slack lines. When you're starting out, you want things to be straightforward. That system is also one of the most affordable options available on the market. So that's cool. This type of webbing is preferred by beginners as well as all level trick liners. Now your 25 millimeter or 1 inch, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Standard slackline webbing is pictured here. This is most commonly made of nylon or polyester. Nylon is going to be your stretchier variety. The polyester webbings are going to be a lower stretch material, just kind of based on the properties of how it elongates under tension. But any slackline that you want to rig that's going to be in the genre of 100 feet plus is going to be 1 inch webbing or perhaps narrower. And so when we get into the disciplines of setting long slack lines in the park, high lining, things like that, the 1 inch 25 millimeter webbing is going to be your most common. It is not common to tension this type of slackline with a ratchet system. So in a slide coming up, we will go over many different options that are available for tensioning your slackline. Let's see, and then 2 other varieties of webbing. High-tech webbing, either 1 inch or 20 millimeters wide, just a little bit narrower. That category is basically they use some specialty materials beyond nylon and polyester. And usually what they're focusing on with these webbings is to increase strength to make them, so incredibly strong, incredibly light, and very low stretch. And so this type of webbing would come into play when you're trying to rig a slackline, anything probably over 200 meters, which would be somewhere over 650 feet. And that most commonly would be a high line. And then the tubular nylon freestyle webbing is a newer, somewhat emerging genre, but this is awesome. What's going on with these is folks are rigging a high line at anywhere from 150 to 200 feet plus and just bouncing away on it, doing all kinds of acrobatic moves, rolls, all kinds of rotations. It's an emerging genre that is really exciting. And at the end of this presentation, if we have a little extra time, we might talk about that a little bit more. But the story with this webbing is it's very stretchy, and it's used for that freestyle genre as well as beginner high lines in the 70 feet or shorter range. So there's an introduction into the different types of slackline material that you can explore as you're beginning your slackline adventure. And then the last, I know this is getting a little bit like kind of product, not necessarily product, but materials focused. We're just kind of going through the components of a slackline rig, and then we'll talk about other aspects of the sport once we have that base level understanding. And the last slide that pertains to sort of the mechanics of slacklining is the question of how do we tension the lines. So basically what your goal is to tension your piece of webbing between your 2 anchor points. How do we accomplish that? We mentioned the Ratchet system, very accessible product to tension 2-inch webbing. For years and years, for 1-inch webbing, the conventional method was either the Ellington or primitive system. And as you can see here, this is a very simple system that involves 2 carabiners and essentially one chain link or a steel or aluminum ring for your friction lock on your webbing here. And then the configuration of running the webbing between these two carabiners gives you a theoretical mechanical advantage of 4-to-1. If you look at what kind of friction we're going to be dealing with in this tensioning system, we're not actually getting anywhere close to a 4-to-1 mechanical advantage in that tensioning system. But that's kind of how we put it out on paper, at least. And when we talk about mechanical advantage, basically in this setup, you're going to be pulling on this strand of webbing. And so theoretically, if you pull on that piece of webbing and you put 100 pounds of force into your pull, you should be getting 400 pounds of force tensioning your line. Now, granted, in real terms, the friction that's happening here is not going to allow for that, but that's how the concept works. The Ratchet system is theoretically close to 50-to-1. The pulley system, as it's configured here, is the other most common, at least over the last 10 years, and currently one of the most common ways to tension 1-inch webbing. And this configuration is 2 double pulleys. So each pulley here has 2 wheels. The 2 pulleys together accommodate 4 strands of rope. And then you have a device here. Many will recognize what's referred to as a gree-gree, a device in climbing, which works as your progress capture. To go into how pulley systems are assembled, things like that, we probably don't have time in this presentation, but there's a lot of really good resources out there that I can point you to, and just more good stuff to explore. So the mechanical advantage of this configuration is 15-to-1, so a very effective way to tension a slackline. Yeah, so the Buckingham system has become much more popular recently. Basically, what's happening here is this device is grabbing the webbing, holding it, just basically using 2 plates with a rubber coating on them. And then we attach a pulley to that system to yank the webbing into this progress capture and out. So this here is called a web lock. And once your slackline is tensioned, you remove this, the slackline is ready to walk. There are a number of specialty products out there that allow you to tension your slackline. And then the antiquated methods are where the fun stories come into play. But you can use chain hoists, come-alongs, different things to tension your slacklines. You need to make sure that they can handle the load, which many of these products can. I wouldn't necessarily I wouldn't recommend pursuing one of these antiquated methods unless you happen to already own the equipment. And in that case, you just want to make sure it's going to be strong enough for the type of slackline you're looking to rig. Many variations within each method with varying degrees of efficiency. Each method requires some unique safety protocols while you're rigging your slackline, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. And the concept of, well, we already went over efficiency, mechanical advantage versus friction. Let's see here. So actually, I want to address this slide. So this pertains to slackline rigging. Slacklining, when practiced correctly, is one of the safest athletic activities anyone can engage in when practiced correctly. When practiced incorrectly, it can certainly be one of the most dangerous. One of the first principles for safely rigging your beginner line is to back up any components that if something were to happen to the integrity of the slackline itself, you just want to tie down any hardware that could go flying because you are indeed adding tension to a material with elasticity. So for all beginner slack lines, no matter how you rig it, whether it's with a pulley system, whether this would be with the Buckingham system that we looked at on the previous slide, or with a ratchet, you just want an independent rope that's not part of your primary anchoring system backing up your hardware. It's nothing to be scared about. If your webbing's in good condition, any sort of failure on that front is pretty much unheard of. But it's when the webbing is damaged, something like that, that you need to retire it. If for some reason you didn't notice that it had taken on some damage or wear, you would have this system in place to protect you if anything went wrong. So the various types of slacklining. We have conventional slacklining. You're in a park, you set up a slackline between trees, we're having fun. A high line is any line set at an elevation that would make it appropriate to leash into the line. There's a lot of depth to this discipline, and some slides coming up will articulate basically give a broad introduction of the various things you need to consider if you're looking to get into high lining. But yeah, so I'm leashed into this line here with a redundant system. The entire system is redundant. So despite how dangerous it looks, what I'm doing here was safer than the drive I took up to Palisade Head. If anybody recognizes this, it's safer than riding my bike around the campground. This is a very safe activity. As is this is the freestyle genre that we are enjoying watching the development of and participating in a little bit. This is that real bouncy tubular nylon webbing that we looked at on the previous slide. A rodeo line is a really fun activity to set up right along with your park line or your long line in the park. It's just a piece of slackline webbing with no tension on it. Obviously, it's hung between trees. And what a lot of people love to do on rodeo lines is surf. So you swing back and forth, as well as do a multitude of other really exciting maneuvers. Trick lining is that high tension 2-inch webbing. This is Aaron Bray here, and he is able to do flips and leaps and spins and rolls and all kinds of amazing things on his trick line. And then long lining, this is another park activity. It's basically this, but the magnitude of the line increased to whatever degree. Really fun park activity. When you're talking about getting into this genre of slacklining is where you really need to start using, well, any genre except for these two actually, where you really need to start using equipment that you know is rated, has been tested, because you start getting into dealing with tensions that are a little bit higher. And if you're using the right equipment, it's never a concern. So let's see here. We talked about backups. I'm going to go over these text slides fairly quick, but safety and slacklining is priority number one always. This description of safety processes and concepts is in no way comprehensive. But two of the important concepts with regards to any type of slacklining as well as highline rigging is redundancy. So backing up your park line is the first practice in redundancy that you will practice from square one. The redundancy built into highline systems are much more comprehensive. But before we get into that, what does redundancy mean? It means the inclusion and replication of components which are not explicitly required for system function in case of a failure of a primary system component. So basically, all our equipment is good. We trust it 100%. Despite that, we're still going to double everything or more than double everything with identical equipment. The reason we do that is for absolute peace of mind. If you're about to get on a high line, you will not be successful on that high line if you have any question as to whether that high line is 100% safe. When I go out on a high line, I know that if I'm tied incorrectly, I have a friend verify my attachment points. I know that nothing's going to happen to me out there. That's a really good feeling, and it really allows for me when I do get out there to have fun, which is what it's all about. Yeah, so every critical component needs 2 times redundancy. Got it. Component strength, we kind of already talked about this. The factor of safety definition is basically the ratio of the component's absolute strength in relation to the maximum load that you're ever going to put on it. So like a safe number for just a standard high line that you're not doing anything crazy on would say we could possibly put up to 2,000 pounds of tension on that slack line with just the peak shock load. Now, I know we're never actually going to do that, but that's a number that I feel is safe. That means with a 4-to-1 safety ratio, every single piece of equipment in my assembly needs to be rated to handle at least 800 pounds. For your primary connection points, primary rigging material, your redundant slackline, webbing, stuff like that. Or 5-to-1, it would be 10,000 pounds. Right. Rule of thumb, if you're rigging a high line and for any reason you're ever questioning anything, back it up with components that are adequately strong. If you're still questioning, eliminate doubt by pursuing an alternative path, or just wait. Don't do it. If you haven't quite figured out your system, if you don't quite have the right equipment yet, come back another day. And the community aspect of slacklining and highlining is where that really comes into play, because there is, especially in the Midwest, there is a large community here to support you. You know, if you went to go rig a highline by yourself and you couldn't quite figure it out, and then you reached out on the MinSlack Facebook group, when you return to that highline to do it right, you'll probably have 8 people with you that want to help and enjoy the slackline with you, which is really, really a wonderful thing. We don't need to spend too much time on this slide, but the source is here, and this diagram basically illustrates the primary components of every highline assembly. So we had looked at some bolt anchors. That is what this diagram is showing. The other anchor of this highline would be a tree here. And then the diagram shows every single component. So for example, 15 right here, we were talking about padding. That's accounted for as well. So this is a very good PDF article that's available. It'll be linked here, as well as it's easy to find on the International Slackline Association website. Let's see. So slacklining and highlining, when practiced properly, is one of the safest activities one can engage in. Statistics do back this up, and there are systems in place to track all safety-related incidents, so that evidence is available. Okay, so the equipment's good. What is the leading cause of injuries in the sport? Because there are some, granted not a ton. The source of those industries, the source of those incidents tie back to improper practices and human error in rigging. So basically what I want to talk about here is how you interact with the group of people that you're slacklining with or highlining with. So Slackline Groups, it is an association of individuals, but you're collaborating with a purpose to have fun slacklining in a way that is safe. So Slackline Highline groups function upon a foundation of mutual accountability, respect, and trust. These groups comprise of very diverse individuals from all walks of life. What we have in common is that we love slacklining. And just a broad stroke overview of common group safety protocols. Whenever we rig something, we verify it, and you need at least 2 people who really know what they're doing to look at every assembly before it's used, before somebody gets on a slackline or out on a high line. If you are tying into a high line or securing yourself to any kind of anchor, just like in climbing, you need a buddy check. You need to check your knot, check your attachment point, that type of thing. Conduct, especially around high lines, there needs to be a general understanding of how we're going to act. If we're close to a cliff, are we always going to be tied in? Yes. Those types of mutual understandings, agreements within groups. There's going to be a diversity in expertise. So if you go out with a group to highline, the goal there is for folks who have less experience, get it from those with more experience. It's very much a collaborative effort, which is what I love so much about the sport. And then, of course, say it always needs to be mentioned, it's very important for our group, is that leave no trace. So we love slacklining. We want to protect the areas we do it. And so once our slackline is de-rigged and we are gone, the goal is for it to leave the environment as if we were never there. All right, now to some fun stuff. The slackline scene in Minnesota and the Midwest. So the Midwest has a very vibrant and rapidly expanding slackline scene, which is totally awesome. As a group, about in the middle of winter, we kind of outlined what our goals are. And those are collective slackline progression and skills development. We want to improve as a group as well as individuals. Inclusive, enthusiastic outreach to community members, meaning the larger community. If you're interested in slacklining, there is a group here to help you find out what you need to know, and they're cool people. So if y'all want to slackline together with us, you definitely can. Comprehensive, up-to-date slackline methodology and safety education. We stay up to date on our stuff, on the latest in rigging techniques and equipment, excellence in safety and rigging practices, and then engaging in project-based collaborative initiatives to enjoy world-class slacklines in Minnesota. Yes, we have them. They're amazing. Come out with us. We'll show them to you. Around the US and beyond. So as a group, we travel quite a bit. The MinSlack group is a Facebook group that started in 2013 and is odd as just a Facebook group sort of facilitating activity for slacklining in the Midwest. This has been it, which is a really cool thing. Now, for a few years, we've also had Slackline Minnesota. And really beginning this spring, we are ramping up Slackline Minnesota activities a lot, simply because we've seen a huge expansion in the sport. So through this, we are looking to provide education, points of contact, various events within a somewhat limited capacity in terms of just how we engage with the public. But getting involved with this organization is a really, well, both the MinSlack page and this organization are going to be 2 great resources for getting going slacklining in the area that we live. So yeah, find the MinSlack group on Facebook. It is a private group right now, but it's still searchable, and all you have to do is ask us to join and we'll let you right in. We were getting a bunch of bots joining the group for a short period of time there. That's why I made it private. But yeah, if you're looking to reach out with people in the area, MinSlack is the way to do it. Slackline Minnesota is not-for-profit, and the mission is to share the physical, mental, and social benefits we've experienced through the sport of slacklining. And so a big part of the mission here is to engage with schools, community clubs and organizations, religious organizations, or even your workplace, anywhere that would be appropriate for somebody to come and provide beginner slackline clinics or talks, any kind of slackline education that you're interested in, Slackline Minnesota can coordinate that. So we're having Slackline educational events as well as some Slackline activity events. One of our objectives is going to be to start exploring dedicated Slackline parks as an area, kind of a focal point for people explicitly interested in slacklining to congregate and practice their craft. The gear library that Slackline Minnesota is maintaining is accessible to all members. And especially when you start getting into rigging high lines, depending on the circumstance, you can be talking about thousands of dollars worth of equipment. We already have it all. And we, through the gear library, we're willing to lend it to people. Durable equipment that maybe you only use it a few times a year as a slackliner. Through this nonprofit, of which slackliners in the area are members, we sort of own that gear collectively, and it's been a lot smarter solution for us. And then last thing for Slackline Minnesota is just to unleash the creativity of our membership. So if you have projects, ideas, things you want to work on, the resources and organizational structure of Slackline Minnesota is here to support that. So it's a cool way, it's a cool avenue through which to unleash some creativity. We have some merchandise that we sell that can all be found on slacklineminnesota.org. These items just kind of support us. I'm wearing the shirt right here. This Slackline kit actually is a really good option for a beginner slackline kit. So if anybody is interested, it's some kits that we acquired. They're high quality, and we're able to sell them at a price below market value because of a company that was relocating. They just needed to unload some inventory. But yeah, check that out. All of this, here's the gear library. And then all of this information, including a fantastic podcast that we produce, is available at slacklineminnesota.org. So, okay, with a quarter of our presentation left, we are able to get to what I always feel is the most exciting component of all of these presentations, are the stories, tales, and photos of the adventures that all of these amazing expo presenters take. And here are some of ours. These aren't necessarily, I participated on all these trips, but here I am presenting group trips, group endeavors. One of the really cool things about slacklining, especially when you get into various highline projects, stuff like that, yes, it could be viewed as an individual sport, but you can't do it alone. It's very much a community thing. And the community is strong. So this is in North Carolina. The first few photos, I just thought like, hey, when we go on a trip, we always take a group, or we always wind up with some kind of good group photos. This is out in Rapid City, South Dakota, the Slackline crew there. This is Minnesota folks, as well as folks who live in North Carolina. We go out there and rig in the Smoky Mountains, and there are photos of those lines as well and some upcoming slides. This is a great crew out in Michigan. And really the cool thing about slacklining, this is the Hawaii slackline crew. We went out there this past February. The cool thing about slacklining is, at least in the United States, anywhere you're going, at least any state, if not any city, you can hop on Facebook, find out who the slackliners are, tell them, hey, I'm coming into town and would you want a slackline? And unless they have a prior conflict, the answer is going to be yes, and you are going to have fun. And you're going to make some lifelong friends. These guys, and in the picture, you know, this line was from that trip to Hawaii. They are lifelong friends now. We spent 5 days together rigging high lines, and we talk every other day. So it's a very cool way to connect with other people through this shared passion. So the first couple photos, I don't know if anybody recognizes this. This is Bridalville Falls. So this is a line that's right here in Minneapolis, accessible to set up. One of the slackline styles that I didn't reference on the other slide is just a water line. And this is just a 2-inch ratchet system. So you have your slackline, you want to set it up over water, go for it. You fall in the water, awesome. Not necessarily with the weather that we have today, but very soon. Here are 2 water lines. This is actually down in a quarry in Iowa, but there are a lot of closer water lines than this particular quarry. This is up on the Iron Range. Looks like a familiar scene to people, just pits, old retired mine pits that this is now recreational land. You can fish on this water, boat, non-motorized boat on it, and rig slackline. So rigging a line that you do leash into, and of course I'm wearing a leash here, any line that's of any significant height you would leash into. Doesn't have to be that complicated, and you don't need a ton of height, especially if it's over water. Just find a nice gap and see how it goes. Same story with this line. This is a very small lake behind my mom's house. There doesn't happen to be any structures on it. There's not a house on this very small lake. And I found out who owned the property. They gave me permission to slackline there, and awesome. This is a 200-meter slackline, which is a little over 650 feet long. And I just really enjoy it. This is just an aerial shot of that same lake. So it's cool. Even though we don't have big mountains and whatnot here in Minnesota, you can still enjoy some amazing lines. And for example, like, say this were some big canyon in Colorado, I'd have 300 feet below me. That's great. That's fun. With the water below you and with the visual challenges that wind sweeping over the water present, it's actually better training than if I were staring down 300 feet to the ground. So you discover interesting things like that that serve your slackline skills development. This is another picture of just behind somebody's cabin, just over a river. Go for it. If there's enough height and you can identify 2 really strong anchor points, why not set up a slackline? This is right here in Minneapolis as well. This is a 50-meter line. It's an awesome beginner line on the Mississippi River, right on the border of Minneapolis and St. Paul. So the cool thing is you don't need to travel great distances to start having fun on some really beautiful high lines. Again, this is between Nicollet Island and the west bank of the Mississippi River. This particular line is 5 minutes from where I am right now. Same line, different season, pretty cool. One thing about slacklining, people think we do it only in summer. We do it in all 4 seasons, any weather, any temperature. So it's cool that it's a sport that does not have a season. Granted, on certain days in winter, it can be a little bit less pleasant. This is High Falls in Tetagooch State Park. Just set up a short high line. I think this is probably like 80 feet long or something like that. There's another picture of it. Another waterfall on the North Shore. Same concept. If you see a cool gap that you would like to slackline, make sure it's not explicitly prohibited from doing. And actually, there's some cliff jumping here that happens that the DNR is not that excited about. And so in respect of that sentiment, we don't rig that line anymore, but at least we got a cool photo of it. This is a line connecting the states of Minnesota and Wisconsin over the St. Croix River. I'm sure a lot of people watching are familiar with this spot. Another picture of it there. and another one there. This line was 420 feet long, just absolutely beautiful, and a joy to rig as well as walk. Here's a slack line over the same river, just a little bit, just a few miles away outside of Stillwater. I was trying to say north or south, but yeah, another cool local adventure here. I'm sure folks recognize this spot. This is the 130-foot line at the Palisade Head Amphitheater. And then another line at Palisade Head. This is kind of a very recognizable scene here. This gap with Shovel Point behind it. That line's 585 feet long. That has to be one of the most beautiful lines in the state, and we love it.
Hey, Mark?
This is another, yes.
Got a question that just popped in here.
All right.
I just turned on my mic for the viewers here. Got a question that just came in. What is the procedure for falling off one of the high lines? Please briefly outline how to fall off and what happens next.
Totally. That's an awesome question. So this line, and that question came at the perfect time, because my first crossing of this line, I fell 70 times.
Wow.
And yeah, it took a couple hours to get across. I have since walked it successfully without falling. But falling and highlining, people say, what if you fall? It's like, you're definitely going to fall. Your leash basically is basically the distance from the bottom of your heel up to your waist, directly below your belly button is your attachment point on a climbing harness. And then you add just a little bit extra to that, so your leash ring is not in the way while you're walking the high line. And the leash, along with the rings that are threaded through the high line, that is all doubly redundant in terms of the rope and sheathing that's on the leash that you tie into, as well as those steel rings. In this picture, the steel rings that I'm on are rated to 10,000 pounds a piece, and there are 2 of them. But to answer the audience member's question, is when you fall off, you're hanging 4 feet below the line. And a good technique for falling, if you know you're going to fall, is to just turn sideways and do a somersault. Now, when you're that high off the ground, that might take some convincing. But part of the rigging process, part of knowing that the slackline is safe, trusting your gear 100%, knowing that when you're out there, there should not be a risk if your harness is good, everything's good. That knowledge allows you to take that fall. And so when you do fall, you somersault off, or you kind of fall off sideways. Maybe you spin a little bit, you bounce, you swing. But there's a very simple technique for climbing the leash and getting back on top of the slackline that is kind of hard to describe, not terribly difficult to learn. While you're learning it, it can take a little bit of energy. But basically, you lean back on your climbing harness, kind of throw your leg over that leash, and just kind of lever back up to the line. And then you rotate your body back on top of the line. And then you would do a sit start in that location. So there's a lot of terminology and methods there that we don't have time to explain in this presentation. But what I can tell you is, if you are going to pursue highlining, after you learn the fundamentals of slacklining, including how to do a sitting start on a slackline, those are things that you will learn, in all likelihood, having a group of people walk through those techniques with you. And the best place to learn those techniques is in the park. So you set up a slackline that it doesn't matter how long it is, as long as it's high enough for you to hang on a leash. And you probably wouldn't even try to walk this slackline, but then you hang on that leash and practice getting on top of the slackline. Yeah.
I have sort of a little bit of maybe an addition to that question. I think of rock climbing, and let's say someone's sport climbing, top roping, and or possibly even trad climbing, and they are just they're bonked out, they get tired, they're at a crux or they're at a spot where they just can't get over and they've tried and tried and tried. And let's just say hypothetically someone does take a fall and let's say it's their 70th fall and they're just physically exhausted. What does that situation look like? Like you can't just lower the person down, but is that security line, are you able to like pulley them in or how does that work? If
That's a really good question. Yeah. So basically, when you start highlining, I would definitely not recommend doing it on something this long. And this next picture articulates how steep that anchor is.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So getting back from a line like that, like this type of line, you have to be ready for it. But when you start on a line that's 50 feet long, once you've mastered that length in the park, you've learned the fundamental concepts of highlining, you should be ready to approach a short highline. Now, to really get to your question is if you start to get smoked out there, there is a device commonly referred to as a roller that you clip to your climbing harness, you clip it to the line, and it allows you to more or less zip line back
Oh sure. Yeah.
to the anchor. Now, granted, that zip line is going to be zip lining uphill, which does require some energy. Say you're dehydrated, say you didn't get enough salt, your arms are cramping up, or something happens, you have a sore shoulder, you cannot get back under your own power. We have a rescue system that we take with us on all these trips that allows for a very smooth rescue of, and you say rescue, it's just, let's just help this person back, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are various rescue techniques depending on what the scenario is, and that's mostly dictated by how long the line is. But in practice, we need to be prepared to rescue anybody from any slack line.
Got it.
Just because you don't necessarily know what can happen. But yeah, especially if something happens where you become unconscious, hanging in the middle of the slack line for whatever reason, the group that you're with needs to be able to get you off the slack line, even if you are in a limp state. So yeah, those rescue systems are an important component. I actually should have mentioned that on those slides. But yeah, that's an important part of it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, because essentially this is basically, I mean, I know the webbing is different, it's flat, and it's varying widths, but it's basically like a Tyrolean traverse, right?
The Tyrolean traverse was what inspired
Yeah.
the sport.
Yeah, so when you're
Totally.
when you're using your own power, you're essentially just pulling yourself back up, and showing in this photo here really exemplifies how steep that would be. It'd be
Yes,
very steep. You'd probably want a pair of gloves and some things with you, maybe for extra grip.
definitely. And one important point to make is that this slackline would fall into the category of kind of your upper level, intermediate to expert level
Got it. Okay.
slackline. So there are some upcoming photos. So that's a picture of the other anchor. And actually this Palisade headline is off level. So if you are getting really tired out there, this side is not nearly as steep. It's
I
still
see.
a little bit steep, but yeah, working your way up to lines that have that much exposure where the anchors do get that steep needs to be a progression. And that is an important point for any stage of slacklining, is that the improvements are incremental over periods of time. If you say, I'm going to devote an entire day to practicing slacklining and then I'm going to get out on a intermediate high line, it's just not going to work out for you.
Yeah.
It's building your skills is a slow progression for sure. But the cool thing about it is every step of the way is equally enjoyable. Like I can honestly say the first slack line that I ever successfully walked was like 20 feet long. And the gratification I got from that was equal to the first time I sent this line here. I have no reservations about that statement whatsoever. It's true.
Hmm.
So every step of the way is super fun.
Are
Uh,
there like in climbing? I know this is very different, but are there certain sort of categories of like grade or difficulty that the slackline community uses?
Typically, so that would fall into how the line is described
Okay.
and what materials it's rigged with. So every individual piece of webbing that's available on the market, and there are many, will have a varying degree of difficulty in relation to how long of a either slackline or high line you rig it with, and then how much tension is on that slackline. So no, there is no rating system, and I would um, be very I'd have lots of praise for whoever tried to come up with one because it's
Sure.
so subjective. I mean, this line right here, this is a 100-meter line. With a slight wind, it's a dream to walk. With gusty winds, it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
And so the amount of variability, the amount of variables that factor into the difficulty of a line are many, and
Yeah.
that's what keeps it exciting. It also makes it extremely difficult to classify or
Sure.
categorize.
Yeah. Great answer. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. No, great question. I'll just try to, hey, Don, how are we doing on time? Do we have another 10 minutes or should we just
Yeah, we
wrap
have
it up?
another 10 minutes. I have we have about another 15, 20 if we need it. So,
Cool. I
yeah.
don't have too many more, but let's just fly through these and then we can use the rest of the time if anybody has any additional questions. This is the Devil Track Canyon, Devil Track River, beautiful canyon right here. We love it. So far we have rigged a 100-meter line right here, a 200-meter that goes out this way, as well as a space net, which is pictured here, which is really cool. A space net or any kind of space line is just multiple slack lines going to one center point, whether it's a piece of hardware to receive all those slack lines or a net like this one. And this was just such a fun day because people can hang out in the net while people are walking the legs. And this entire system, you can see the slack lines are redundant, as is the net. So there's some pretty complex rigging that's happening here that needs to be learned about. And if you pursue it and you do everything right, it's time to have some fun and enjoy it. So
Wow.
that is the net and Lake Superior right there, you know. This is a beautiful spot. There's that 200-meter line. This is that Devil Track spot in winter.
Wow.
This, yeah, like walking this high line, you're essentially in Narnia, and the photos do not do it justice. This trip was magical. Um, this is just a nice slack line over some water. This is a 355-meter line up on the Iron Range. It's funny, the distance here from the line down to the water is actually about 60 feet, although it doesn't look like it. There's just an aerial view of that line. That's a lot of material there. That line was maybe, oh geez, length, maybe 1,300 feet long, something like that. This is in Hawaii. This was a cool line. The trip that we took there, this is the Hawaii crew. And the cool thing about Slackline, fast friends. I talk to these guys all the time after spending just 5 days with them, which is so cool. You know, slackline at a swimming hole over water. A slackline you can work into any kind of wonderful scene that's already exists. So this line, we set the state record for high line length in Hawaii, which was a pretty cool thing to do. So this line was 360 meters. And it was just beautiful. It was an adventure too. The adventure component of rigging high lines, especially when you're establishing new high lines, is, that's almost where most of the memories are made. Walking it is awesome, but the whole 360-degree experience is what you really remember. And then this is the last trip I included some photos from. This is down in Utah. For climbers, canyoneers, slackliners, anybody that is listening, you'll know, if you want to utilize the cliffs around Utah, you don't have to go very far to do it. So yeah, these are all Minnesota people. Well, actually, Danette's from Madison, Wisconsin. I spoke too quickly. But yeah, we all went down to Utah and camped in the desert this February and just had a blast. This line was awesome. This was the biggest line we rigged. It was 454 meters or 1,490 feet long. And you can see in this, there's a lot of stag in this line. There's not much tension on this line either. There's another view of it. Oh yeah, and in this picture, I'm just that tiny green dot. I'm sure you guys realize that. But yeah, so just in terms of the adventure and the creativity and rigging, this is in North Carolina. This is a 1,000-foot line. We've been to this similar spot in North Carolina for the last 5 years. The Minnesota group takes a trip out there. The slacklining brings you to some of the most beautiful, especially if you enjoy heights, some of the most beautiful places you can imagine. And they're same deal. The North Carolina crew welcomes us. They show us where to camp and where to rig the high lines, and we just have a blast. In North Carolina, we also set the state record there for high line length, and this is it. This one was 270 meters long, rigged on a pretty difficult webbing too. So we felt really good about that. That's just another shot of it. And that's it. Those are all my pictures. So I would love to answer questions just another 1 or 2 questions if we have time, or Don, if it's time to hang it up too. That's totally good.
Yeah, I don't see any questions in the chat box. I was wondering about, in some of the recent shots there in the Utah series. There's like a lot of the equipment. I shouldn't say maybe the equipment for rigging, but getting to the spots where you're gonna be setting up an anchor point. Obviously you're hiking in with all this gear. On average, what is this? Let's say you're setting up that Palisade head line. What kind of weight are we talking about as far as gear? Like hundreds of pounds? I mean, what is this? What is sort of the that look like?
Yeah, so I guess I shouldn't have necessarily gone away from my slides here. So you share the burden, but pretty much, so for a line like this one, if you have 6 people that you're rigging the line with, and that would be the number I'd recommend at a minimum for one like this, specifically with webbing that is as heavy as the type of webbing we used here. If each of those people are able to carry either a 50 or 60 pound pack, you'll be just fine.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, some of those people will be connected in that this continuous piece of webbing does not fit into one pack.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, so you're walking and you're connected to the person next to you. But yes, the gear is definitely not light, but there are smart ways to do it, and we're getting smarter and smarter. So for example, I bought this piece of webbing back when connecting multiple slack lines was not necessarily a recommended practice. now we have developed ways of connecting multiple pieces of webbing, often the same type, um, in a way that is redundant and secure and extensively tested, such that it is safe to have your entire slackline in multiple bags where the bags don't need to be connected, because you're able to connect the various components or the various pieces of that line on site.
Nice.
So it's like a modular long high line
Hmm.
rig. And so our new rig is, we'll be able to rig as long as 600 meters plus, but every single section is only 120 meters long,
Nice.
which makes it a lot easier.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely allows for just packability, portability, efficiencies in getting to your anchor points. I'm curious if in your experience, I didn't realize you'd been slacklining for a decade or so, and I'm wondering if in that amount of time, the has the gear sort of progress with the rise in interest, or there's still some things you're like, God, I wish someone made this, and you just haven't quite found it, or something like that.
the um, so the first part of the question, yes, the efficiency and the weight and just the function of the gear that's available now is phenomenal. It is so much easier than it used to be. What predates me slightly were the first highlines being rigged with entirely industrial rigging and climbing gear, where there was nothing that was highline specific. That's changed quite a bit. So yeah, there's a lot of amazing gear options out there to facilitate your slackline rigging to make things easier. And one of the companies you want to check out here in the United States to kind of get an idea of the different types of gear that's available is Balance Community. If you just Google search Balance Community, their website will come up. But also Slackline Minnesota. And if it's okay, Adon, I'll just show this website.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, during the presentation, we referenced the gear library. And so we have a lot of this gear that you'll need to start out and then get into the really, really advanced side of things. We own it already. And as long as you're willing to take care of it as a member of the organization, we will definitely lend it to you.
Nice.
If you're starting out, we have a bunch of really high quality beginner slackline kits, and then all different types of webbing that we store and are ready to lend as soon as somebody wants to borrow it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I would love to pick up one of the slackline kits for our family here at the house.
Definitely. Yeah, it's you can order it on the website. We can ship it to you, or just you can come pick it up, whatever.
Awesome. Sounds good. I would love to do that. Cool. Well, I don't see any more questions. I posted a link to slacklineminnesota.org, and I mentioned the Balance community in the expo.com site in the chat box there.
The other link I would include would be the Men's Slack Facebook group. So it's just www.facebook.com/groups/Men's Slack.
MINN Slack.
Yeah. And that Facebook group, if you're just looking to meet people locally, that is the way to do it for sure.
Awesome. I dropped that in there in the chat too. Great. Wonderful. Perfect. Thank you so much, Mark, for all your knowledge and your stories, and wonderful presentation. Love seeing the pictures. Definitely gave me a little bit of some sweaty palms here and there, but yeah. I mean, that tells you you're alive, right?
It does. Well, and the thing to remember, we slackline in the parks on very small slacklines twice a week.
Oh, cool.
We just never take any pictures.
Sounds good.
So all the pictures are from our big, exciting adventures, which don't be intimidated by those pictures. Start out small. You're going to have a blast. get in touch with us. We'll help you out.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate your time and your presentation. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and thanks for everyone who tuned in to watch. For those of you that missed it or want to sort of go back and watch it, this will be archived on our YouTube page and also on the Midwest Mountaineering Outdoor Adventure Expo.com site. So with that being said, we'll say goodbye to Mark, and thanks again, Mark. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Adon.
Yeah, bye
Talk to
now.
you soon.